Hey everybody, happy Friday night here in San Francisco or wherever you are out in the world. Welcome to the 19th annual SF DocFest. Things, as you can see, are a little bit different this year as we're kind of beaming these films in our Q&A into your living room or on your phone or wherever you decide to watch movies. The film that you just saw, Rory's World, was a film we've been kind of excited about from the beginning, and we're excited about the program as DocFest. And so tonight we're lucky enough to have director Rob Christopher here, and of course the subject of the film, Barry Gifford. So if we can give them both a warm welcome, that'd be great. Thanks again, Rob and Barry.
Happy to be here.
So to kind of start things off, Rob, can you kind of tell us about how did you first kind of become aware of like Barry and his work, and that you knew you wanted to kind of make a film?
Well, I really first became aware of his work when David Lynch's Wild at Heart came out. I was deeply into Twin Peaks and David Lynch at that time, and was really excited by the movie. And then later, when I read Barry's original novel, I was very surprised to realize that most of the weird stuff in the movie comes straight from the book. And then later on, I discovered that he'd written this whole series of stories basically set mostly in Chicago in the 50s and early 60s. And they're very different in tone from Wild at Heart and some of his other Southern style stories, and that was just really intriguing to me. It kind of showed me a side of Chicago that I'd never really seen before. So that's kind of the short version of how I became aware of the Roy stories.
And Barry, maybe can you tell us a little bit about how things started with you? How did Rob approach you, and how did you feel about kind of translating this kind of part of your life and your and also your writings into the film that we just saw?
Well, at first I wasn't open to it at all. The thing is, I had a couple of other feature documentaries made about me and my work in Italy and in France. And the thing that I liked a lot of the things in there, but they were pretty conventional in a sense. One for Arte in France, and the kind of films they are. And I didn't like the idea of talking heads. I didn't want it just to be, that same kind of interview this person, interview that person, and, when did you first see Barry walking down the street or whatever. And so then I got back to Rob about it, and I said, look, this is the Roy stories. If you want to make a movie about Roy and not about Barry Gifford per se, yes, I created this character. And certainly, some of his experiences are similar to some of mine, but it's not a memoir. It's not an autobiography. It's fiction. It means I made it up. So if you want to do a film about Roy, go ahead and show me how you can do it. And, it surprised the hell out of me. I just want to say that first, Chris, that I think that, I thought, well, I'd see this film and I'd say, oh, that's interesting, let's go have a beer. But in fact, it wasn't like that at all. And it was such a wonderful surprise that somehow he managed to pull it off. He's a genius.
He did a really nice job, Rob. So when kind of Barry threw down this gauntlet of saying, hey, look, here's this kind of creative project you could pursue, did you see that as a challenge, and how did you kind of, as a filmmaker, come up with some of the kind of unique visual ways that you wanted to tell the story?
Well, I always like to quote from Philip Glass's memoir, where he writes, if you don't know what you're doing, there's a good chance that something interesting will happen. If you know what you're doing, then very little of interest is likely to happen. So I did take it as a challenge because I didn't really know how to do that kind of a film, but I trusted in the process. I trusted in drawing my inspiration, direct stories as much as I could, and that time and place. And I just sort of kept at it, and that kind of gave me a way into approaching the stories that way. One thing that's especially helpful is, as Barry just mentioned, his stories are autobiographical, but they're fiction. And I just knew that that was the way to make the movie work, where we're kind of exploring Barry's writing history, but it's all through this character that he's created. So it's kind of a biography, but it's kind of fictional too, just like the stories. So yeah, I drew from that a lot.
Cool. We'll have some more questions, but this just came in from the audience. This is from Sheldon Frischinger. He says, Barry, your Chicago and mine are mirrored. Let's see. I don't know if you ever knew Barry Stein. Sounds like someone I would have grown up with in Rogers Park. I lived at Lunt Beach. And basically, how did you become Gifford?
Oh, well, the thing is that my father's name was Stein, and my mother and father basically got divorced soon after I was born, in a very short time. And I was born as Barry Gifford. It says Barry Gifford on my birth certificate. And my mother's maiden name was Colby. So I never really used the name Stein. And so I became Barry Colby Gifford. And that's pretty much what I've been using ever since.
And, documentary is an interesting art form, we're under the guise of that we're, telling some sort of, real life or truth. But, one of the things that's kind of unique with your film, Rob, is that, you're working or being inspired by another kind of creative artist. And so did you guys see this as a collaboration, or was there a collaboration at all in the making of the movie? Or Barry, did you just kind of, hey, Rob, run wild with the film and let me see what you're done with afterwards? What was that?
Well, one of the other things I said to Rob was, I don't want to be in it. I mean, yes, it's a film about Roy, so let's leave it at that. And let's see, I really do like that Rob uses that quote from Philip Glass. It goes along a bit with my own writing style, which is I never know how a story is going to end. I never know how a book is going to end. Mickey Spillane, the mystery writer, who wrote the Mike Hammer books, back in the 50s, he said he always wrote the ending first. And I know other people like that. Elmore Leonard was like that, who was a friend of mine. I mean, they knew where they were going. They'd like to know where they were going. I absolutely don't want to know where I'm going. It's like when people want to do interviews and they say, well, we'll send you a list of the questions. And I say, absolutely not. I'm not going to read the questions. I want the answers to be spontaneous. And I feel the same way with my fiction.
Nice.
One thing that Barry did that was the most helpful is he just trusted me. He wasn't, vetoing anything. He kind of gave me some pointers now and then and would, push me in a certain direction. But really, he was very hands-off. He just allowed me to play in his fictional world and make of it what I wanted to. And that's incredibly freeing as a filmmaker. For a writer to trust you that way is pretty extraordinary. So that's really the greatest gift I could have been given on this project, because if he had said, well, this story's off limits, I don't want you putting this in the movie, it wouldn't have been a fruitful way to work. So I'm really appreciative of that.
That's why I always say this is Rob's film. It's not my film. Because when people have referred to me recently, about your film, I said, it's not my film. It's Rob's. It's Rob's take on the work. And it's Roy's film. In that sense, it's Roy's world. I mean, the next book I have coming out, which is next week, is also called Roy's World.
Oh, wow.
And it's the title of one of the stories. And that's why I said to Rob, I said, here's the perfect title for your film, Roy's World. That's what it's about. That's the world that we're about to inhabit.
Now, is that a character that you've kind of continued to revisit over the years, or that you think that you will?
Well, Roy is certainly one. I
Yeah.
started writing the Roy stories 40 years ago, Chris. So
Yeah.
the thing is that they've just grown up and up. You know, it's like with the Sailor and Lula novels. I started with Wild at Heart. That was the first, and it grew to 8 novels. So it includes, you know, Sailor and Lula, their families, and then eventually their son Pace. And the last novel is all about Pace's life, the up-down. I didn't expect that after Wild at Heart, I was going to go on and write more about Sailor and Lula. In fact, one of the characters, Perdita Durango, came in at the end. She wound up with her own movie, too. And I thought she was sort of threatening to take over the novel. But then I wanted, Sailor and Lula kept talking to me. So I felt it was my responsibility to write down what they were talking about and what they were doing. And it's the same way with Roy, and Roy keeps going. And I think it's kind of a never-ending project. Maybe somebody will pick it up after I'm gone.
Have you, over the years, do you go back and visit Chicago frequently at all, Barry, or do you just kind of wind up there on trips? And like, how do you think it's kind of changed since then?
Well, when I left, I was 17, and I've been back actually very, very rarely since that time. I didn't go back for a number of years. You know, I really grew to hate snow and ice. And I said, I'm never going to live in a place that has, you know, this kind of cold wind and snow and ice before. But the funny thing about it, and I think Rob has mentioned this to me too, among others, is that most of the stories, and I look at them as not just stories, but chapters now, they take place in bad weather. And so I think that this is an omnipresent feature, and the weather is a character actually in the stories. And they really have, as you know, I mean, it has so much to do with the mood. And Hemingway once said, don't forget the weather. So I haven't forgotten it, and I could never forget the Chicago weather.
I haven't been to Chicago too many times, but I can tell you I can't forget the weather myself either. And actually, we're lucky enough, we have a question here from a local film critic, a great guy, Michael Fox. And he asks, he says, as an ex-Chicagoan, born in 1955, he connected directly with the film and Roy's Chicago. So this is a question for Rob. How did the actors connect with that world, and you know, what was that kind of creative process working with them like?
Well, it was the funniest thing. You know, if you had told me at the beginning of this project, oh, you're going to have Matt Dillon, Willem Dafoe, and Lili Taylor performing the stories, I would have said you were nuts. But early on in the project, when Barry started to, you know, kind of warm up to the idea of me doing something like this, as I recall, he made an offhand suggestion one day, oh, you know, we should get Willem Dafoe to read a couple stories for your movie. And I was like, yeah, let's make that happen. And then a couple days later, Barry said, well, you know, let's get Matt Dillon to read some stories too. And I said, absolutely. So those two actors came on board. They know Barry personally very well, and they're very familiar with his work. So when it came time to record their voiceover, it didn't take a whole lot of direction for me, because they're so intimately familiar with his language. And his language reads beautifully out loud. So that's another big help. Lili, I wanted because I knew that a female voice was really important. There are a lot of really important female characters in the stories, including Roy's mother, Kitty. And another interesting thing about Lili is she was born in Glencoe, Illinois. So she has this really great Illinois accent in her voice, which is just perfect for the stories. So Lili and Matt did a film called Factotum together. And Matt was the one who was able to kind of connect me to her and we were off to the races. I couldn't be more pleased with those three actors.
Also remember that Willem is from Appleton, Wisconsin. And then, he went to Chicago initially before he was in New York. So having, his understanding in the Midwestern voices of Lily and Willem, that was perfect. I mean, that's just what you wanted. And Matt understood it, again, in a different way.
Yeah, but it's interesting because the readings and performances, they do become their kind of own characters. They don't feel just like, just a narrator. There's kind of there are character elements to it, in the sense of like you feel like this is a real person who's telling you a story versus just some omniscient narrator, reading something. I assume being connected, appreciating your work, Barry, is something that probably they brought to the table in that way. So I know, Rob, you've had a chance to kind of, the film started screening at festivals here this spring, and I think your world premiere was like in Scotland, I think. What was the kind of response to kind of non-Americans to the film, and how did they kind of to see it, or what sort of questions, what was the kind of response you were getting as you started screening the film around the world?
Well, we premiered at the Glasgow Film Festival on February 28th, the very last bit of normalcy before the pandemic kind of, ruined everything in more ways than one. But I'm so happy that I was able to have that experience because, here are these people in Glasgow, like halfway around the world, and they could completely relate to the movie. Glasgow had been compared to Chicago. People had made that comparison to me before. So, they totally, the brutality, the corruption, the terrible weather, they know exactly what that's all about. So, but, that's a testament to Barry's language. I mean, he has fans all over the world. So, I could pick any country on the globe, and I'm sure there's a hardcore band of Barry Gifford, fans out there. So it's been really a lot of fun to kind of make that connection with people.
Well, Glasgow, you're right. Rob's right. I mean, when I went to Glasgow, I was immediately comfortable. I knew exactly where I was, and just, how to talk to people and the way that people spoke to me and just how everything worked. And I thought, this is perfect, a perfect place, like Chicago to set novels in. The only other place I've ever been in just really like that, where I immediately knew how everything worked, was Rome. I spent a lot of time in Rome, about 4 years actually. And the thing is that I knew it was all corrupt. I knew that you had to know people to get anything done or to get anywhere, and how the connections were made and how you had to talk to people and understand what they were, saying behind the words that they were using. And so Glasgow and Rome, man, they're just like Chicago was.
I will say that I'm really bummed out about not being at the Roxy Theater tonight, for example. I'd really been looking forward to showing the movie there. So I hope.
Well, hopefully we can, this pandemic will clear up sooner than later, and we'll be able to get you out west, Rob, and hopefully that the film has kind of a nice long life, both digitally but also in theaters. As we kind of wrap up, I guess this is kind of a good way of, I know often, when people see a lot of the films that we show at the festival, there's folks that are very familiar with the filmmaker's work or the subject's, work, and then there's people that are just newly discovering it. So what's the best way for people to kind of continue to kind of follow your work, Barry, and also Rob, and just the life of the film? So you have a new book coming out next week, right, Barry?
I'm sorry?
You have a new book coming out next week?
Yeah, the book Roy's World, subtitled Stories 1973 to 2020. And I'm going to be appearing actually virtually for City Lights Bookstore, which is basically my hometown bookstore. And that's on Wednesday, the 23rd of September. So it's a big book. It's like 720 pages. And so it's a nice doorstop of Roy stories, and you can get it from the beginning all the way through. But I'm not through yet, because right now, in fact, I'm writing a Roy novel, which is not unlike part of the Roy's World book, a novel called Wyoming. And like I said, even with the Sailor and Lula, you know, I'm not going to say it's over until it's over.
Well, I look forward to reading and seeing more of your work, Barry. So just keep up at it. And there are some really great stories, and obviously it's a great film. Rob, what's the best way to kind of follow the film on social media? And I would also encourage folks, is like, if you like the movie, you let people know that you saw it tonight, and it's available for the next 24 hours at sfnd.com. And we as a festival really want to help kind of amplify the voices of the filmmakers and people to discover this new work. So yeah, Rob, what's the best way to kind of share about the movie?
Well, definitely go to roysworldfilm.com and check out what we've got there. You can sign up to be on our mailing list and stuff like that. And if you did like the movie, this is really important. Try to follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, but even more than that, go to IMDb and write a review for us, or rate us, or go to Letterboxd and do the same, because we're trying to find a distributor for this movie. We really want to roll it out nationally, but to do that, we need some ordinary people, viewers such as yourselves, to kind of put the word out about it. Word of mouth is really important for a tiny independent film like ours. So if you like it, tell your friends and help spread the word about it.
Cool. Let's keep the momentum up, everybody. And again, Rob and Barry, thanks again for being here today and sharing a really great film. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Most definitely. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Cool. Well, thank you, guys. Really great. Nice to see the